She called them tacky, a threat to the neighborhood's visual harmony. Said my gnomes disrupted the peaceful aura of her perfect little street. And just like that, Karen, queen of the HOA, declared war on my front yard. At first I laughed, thought it was just another one of her passive-aggressive hobby projects, like measuring grass with a ruler or ticketing someone for a faded mailbox. But this time, it felt different. This time, she made it personal. She gave me 72 hours to remove them. 7 small garden gnomes, each one hand-painted, each one gifted to me over the years. They weren't just decorations, they were memory markers. A quiet little army of joy, each with its own story. And Karen wanted them gone. She said they didn't reflect the values of the community. Well, I had a value too, resistance. She thought I'd just roll over, that I'd yank them from the soil like they were weeds. But instead, I grabbed a shovel for a different reason. If she was going to throw a fit over a few harmless gnomes, then she deserved to meet their queen, 10 feet tall, concrete, paint, and revenge. And she looked just like Karen. It was taped to my front door like a threat. A stiff white envelope, sealed tight, stamped with the unmistakable HOA logo. The same one that had slowly started to feel more like a warning sign than a symbol of order. I knew it wasn't a birthday card. I opened it slowly, like it might explode, and, in a way, it did. Violation notice, unauthorized lawn ornaments. Remove immediately. 7 gnomes. That's what this was about. 7 painted statues, barely a foot tall, spread out across the garden my late wife used to tend. 1 by the rose bush, 2 under the maple tree, a few guarding the stepping stones like miniature sentinels. They'd been there for years, harmless, quiet, smiling. But not to Karen. She'd been circling for weeks, her little dog dragging her down the sidewalk like it was on a mission. I'd seen her slow her pace in front of my house. I'd seen her phone out, aimed at the gnomes. And now I knew why. The letter wasn't written like a polite reminder. It had edge. Disruptive, unsightly, non-compliant with community guidelines, like they were dangerous, like they were planning a coup. But what got me wasn't the language, it was the signature. Karen J. Whitmore, HOA President. She didn't even try to hide it, didn't pawn it off on some generic committee. She put her name right at the bottom, like a stamp of conquest. That's when I realized this wasn't about gnomes. It wasn't even about lawn decor or community standards. It was about control. Her control. Karen liked to see things go her way. She liked beige walls, silent neighbors, trimmed hedges. She liked making people shrink into compliance. And the gnomes? They were a crack in her carefully manicured world. So she tried to snuff them out. I held the notice in my hand for a long time, standing there in the early morning light, coffee cooling in my other hand. Part of me thought about just ignoring it, but another part, a deeper one, the stubborn, quiet fire that had kept me going through darker days, started to smolder. This wasn't just a notice. This was a challenge. It started around 9 a.m. on a Thursday. I was trimming the lavender bush by the walkway, just minding my own business, when I heard the sound of heels clicking against concrete, a lot of them. I looked up, and there they were, Karen and her little band of clipboard crusaders, marching down the sidewalk like they were headed into battle. 5 of them total. Karen, of course, leading the charge in her usual beige power suit, sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. The rest? Mostly spouses of board members, people I'd waved to for years. But now they walked with their heads high, their clipboards out like weapons, ready to document my crimes against suburbia. They stopped right in front of my yard. Karen turned, scanned my lawn like a general surveying enemy territory. She didn't even look at me, just motioned for the others to begin. One started snapping photos of my maple tree. Another was measuring the height of my bird bath. Someone else crouched near the roses like they expected to find a body buried underneath. "Front yard nonconformities," Karen said, loud enough for me to hear. "Unapproved ornaments, possible safety violations, and an overall aesthetic that does not align with the Crestwood community standards. She might as well have called me a public health hazard. I stood there pruning shears in hand, watching them scribble in unison. Not one of them looked embarrassed. They were into it, like this was a sacred mission, like they were protecting the world from garden gnomes and creativity. I cleared my throat, loudly. Karen finally turned to me. "Routine inspection," she said, "all business. We received a complaint." "From who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She smiled. "Anonymous?" "Right." I didn't say another word, just stared as they kept circling like vultures at a picnic. One of them, some guy with a polo shirt tucked way too tightly into his khakis, tried to get a picture of the flower pots on my porch. I stepped in front of him and said, calm as can be, "That's enough." He backed off without a word. They finished their parade 10 minutes later, turning in perfect formation to march off down the street, probably toward the next house that dared to display personality. Karen paused before leaving. "You still have 48 hours to comply." I nodded once, no expression. She walked off like she'd won something. But in that moment, watching her strut away like a peacock in pearls, I made a quiet decision. She wanted a uniform neighborhood? Fine. She was about to get a monument to uniformity so big, so bold, and so perfectly reflective of her. She'd wish she'd left my gnomes alone. I waited until the last possible moment. The sun was just starting to set when I walked out with an old cardboard box and started gathering them up. One by one I lifted their tiny bodies from the earth, each gnome worn by weather and time, each one chipped in places, but still smiling like nothing in the world could shake them. I didn't cry. Not really. But something about it hit me harder than I expected. The first gnome I ever got was a gift from my wife. His name was Gus. She found him at a flea market, said he looked like me when I was grumpy. We used to joke he was the guardian of the front porch. Gus always sat by the mailbox, arm raised like he was waving hello. I wrapped him in an old towel and placed him in the box. Then came Lenny, who used to hold a little fishing pole, and Buttons, who was missing half a hat thanks to a raccoon. Each one had their place, their story, their little presence in the rhythm of my everyday life. Now I was packing them away like old decorations after Christmas. Quiet, careful, bitter. By the time I'd pulled the last one, Rosie, the one with the pink watering can, I looked up and realized something I hadn't expected. The yard felt wrong, empty somehow, too symmetrical, too quiet, like the spirit had been drained out of it. It wasn't just the gnomes that were gone. It was the laughter I used to hear when neighbors passed by and pointed them out. It was the little burst of color that broke up the green. It was the joy, subtle, sure, but real. I sat on the porch for a while, staring at the now blank garden bed. No Gus, no Rosie, no misfit crew of ceramic weirdos to greet me in the morning. Just mulch. I thought about leaving a note in the soil, something petty. But even that felt like more energy than I had to give. Karen had won the battle. But as I sat there in the quiet, something shifted. Not in anger, not yet. It was emptiness, but the kind that begged to be filled. I wasn't planning to spy, that's not really my thing, but sometimes the truth has a way of walking right up to your front yard and introducing itself. It was Saturday morning, the kind of warm spring day that made the air smell like cut grass and possibility. I was watering the flower bed, still gnomeless, still sour about it, when I heard Karen's voice from 2 houses down, loud, performative, the kind of voice meant to be overheard. "I know it's a little pricey, but you get what you pay for," she said, gesturing toward a younger woman standing beside her, tall, polished, clipboard in hand. The same kind of clipboard her mother carried around like a sheriff's badge. They were standing in front of the Johnsons' house, talking about stonework, edging, seasonal rotation schedules. Karen was nodding like a proud stage mom while her daughter did the sales pitch. I stepped back into the shadow of the porch and listened. "This yard's going to be the model for the neighborhood," Karen said, her tone dripping with smug pride, "especially once we phase out all the less cohesive elements." That stung. I knew exactly what she meant by less cohesive. She glanced my way, didn't see me, but it was obvious. This wasn't about gnomes. Not really. It was business. Later that day, I did a little digging. Her daughter, Amanda, had started a boutique landscaping company 6 months ago. Premium curb appeal for luxury communities, the website said. All clean lines, minimalist stone paths, sculpted shrubs, and prices that made my jaw drop, HOA friendly and resale optimized. And there it was. The campaign against my gnomes, the new aesthetic standards, the parade of clipboards and fake concern, it wasn't about order or property values. It was marketing. Karen wanted her daughter's company to shine. And the best way to do that? Erase everything that didn't match the brand, which meant my gnomes, colorful, mismatched, undeniably personal, were bad for business. I sat with that realization for a while, hands folded, watching the sunset paint the sky over my now sterile garden bed. She wasn't trying to beautify the neighborhood. She was trying to sell it. My lawn, my home, my memories. They were just collateral damage in her little empire-building project. And that's when the anger finally hit. Slow, steady. The kind that doesn't boil over but simmers into something sharper. She wanted a uniform neighborhood? Fine. She wanted something sculpted and artistic? I could do that, and if she was going to profit off appearances, then maybe, just maybe. It was time to give her a new one she couldn't ignore, one 10 feet tall. I've never considered myself an artist. I work with my hands, sure. Built a deck once that didn't fall apart, fixed more than a few leaky pipes, even re-shingled the roof after that storm 2 summers back. But I never sculpted anything in my life. Until now. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and a dull pencil. No music, no distractions. Just the hum of the fridge and the sound of revenge sharpening itself into something strangely elegant. This wasn't going to be some angry Facebook post or a snarky letter to the board. I didn't want drama. I wanted legacy. If Karen was going to erase personality from the neighborhood, I'd give her something impossible to ignore. A monument. And not just any monument. A gnome. 10 feet tall. Built from cement, mesh, and spite. But with one little twist. It was going to look just like her. Same angular haircut, same pursed lips, same crossed arms and judgmental stance she wore during her inspections. I could already see it. Her likeness, standing proudly in my yard, holding a clipboard and wearing a tiny HOA pin on her stone lapel. Artistic, maybe, petty, a little, but poetic? Absolutely. I didn't sketch. I just wrote words. Posture, stance, hairline, expression. I wanted to get her essence, the whole aura of superiority that floated around her like perfume. Then I started researching materials. Wire mesh, cement mix ratios, rebar. I watched tutorial after tutorial, hours of sculptors turning blobs into masterpieces. I wasn't aiming for a masterpiece, though. I just wanted it to be unmistakable. I called in a favor from a buddy of mine who ran a small construction supply shop out by the highway. He owed me for fixing his garage door last fall and didn't ask questions when I ordered a pallet of quick-set concrete and enough mesh to build a small bunker. I paid cash. Every detail mattered. The way she stood, the arch of one disapproving eyebrow. I even planned to give her a tiny name tag on her stone blazer. Karen, etched in neat block letters. She took my gnomes, so I'd give her one back, bigger, bolder, and planted right where she couldn't miss it. I wasn't out for revenge anymore. I was building a tribute, one that would outlive the both of us. I thought I was being subtle. Turns out there's no such thing as subtle when you're wheeling a cart full of rebar down your driveway at 7 a.m. in a neighborhood where people report a rogue daffodil like it's a felony. The question started right away. Mrs. Halpern from across the street shouted from her porch, You building a bunker or something?" I just waved and said, "Art project." She laughed, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. Then came the slow drive-bys, cars creeping down the street, windows rolled down, eyes lingering a little too long on the tarp-covered structure that had started rising in my yard. It was just wire mesh at first. Crude, barely formed, but the shape was taking hold. Broad shoulders, tall frame, the beginnings of a clipboard arm. I kept the face covered, that was key. People started whispering. I'd hear them outside, walking dogs or pushing strollers. "Have you seen what he's building? Looks like a statue. Do you think it's a person?" Then, finally, Karen showed up. I saw her SUV crawl to a stop in front of my house like a cat spotting movement in the grass. She didn't get out, just sat there behind the tinted glass, watching. I stood there, hose in hand, pretending to water a patch of lawn that didn't need it. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures again, always with the pictures. Then, a few days later, I found a folded notice taped to my mailbox. Not official HOA stationery this time, just printer paper and passive aggression. Unpermitted structure under review, must cease construction, pending committee approval. No name, no signature, but I knew the handwriting. Karen was rattled. She knew something was happening, but not what. And that uncertainty? It was delicious. Still, I knew I had to be careful. She was sniffing around, asking neighbors, trying to piece it together. I overheard her talking to the mail carrier one afternoon, voice pitched fake friendly. "I just worry he's building something disruptive." Disruptive. Like she could feel the storm brewing but didn't know which direction it was coming from. Good. Let her wonder, let the whispers grow, because I wasn't just building a statue, I was building suspense. And Karen, for once in her life, wasn't in control of the narrative. That alone made the silence around my yard feel electric. The delivery truck showed up just after sunrise, pallet of concrete mix, bundles of rebar, rolls of mesh taller than I was. I signed for it in silence, nodding to the driver who gave me a curious look and asked, "You building a bunker or a sculpture?" I just said, "Little bit of both." From that moment on, the backyard became my sanctuary, my war room. I strung up a massive blue tarp between two trees, anchoring it with cinder blocks and hope. The wind made it flap like a ship's sail, and from the street, it looked like something out of a survivalist's fever dream. That was intentional. People asked, of course. They always ask. My neighbor Greg peeked over the fence on day 2, holding a cup of coffee and wearing the face of a man who couldn't help himself. "Everything okay over there?" "Yep," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "What are you building?" I just smiled. "Something temporary that'll last forever." He blinked, nodded slowly, and backed away like I just told him I was summoning spirits. Every hour I wasn't working, eating, or sleeping, I was out there, bending wire, mixing concrete, shaping the figure piece by piece like a slow, deliberate act of rebellion. The hardest part was the face. I didn't want to rush it. It had to feel right. Karen's features weren't soft. Her chin angled slightly forward like she was always bracing for an argument. Her lips held that permanent line, part smile, part scold. And the eyes, narrowed just enough to feel like they were judging even when they weren't. I didn't make it cruel, just accurate. She deserved to see herself the way we all did, towering, cold, unshakable. I gave the statue a clipboard tucked under one arm and carved the outline of a little HOA badge onto the chest. Every detail was intentional. Every hour poured into it felt like taking back an inch of space she'd tried to steal. By the end of the week, the form stood solid, gray, rough, and magnificent in the way only defiance can be. I kept the tarp tight, anchored from all sides. No one saw it. Not yet. But they knew something was coming. And the silence I gave them in return, that was the real masterpiece. I didn't owe them answers. I owed Karen a message. And I was almost ready to send it. She didn't knock. She just stood there on my porch, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a sermon. Her sunglasses were off for once, tucked into the collar of her sweater, and I could see the tension in her jaw, the practiced calm, barely holding together. "Mr. Harlow," she said, not bothering with hello. I didn't invite her in, just leaned against the doorframe and waited. "I've received multiple concerns from residents regarding the project in your backyard." I didn't say a word, just nodded slowly like I was listening to a weather report. "I'd like to remind you," she continued, "that all external structures must be pre-approved by the HOA board, especially those visible from neighboring properties. The board has the right to demand removal if the structure is deemed disruptive, unsightly, or in violation of aesthetic guidelines." There it was again, her favorite word, disruptive. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't realize creativity needed a permit. Her lips twitched. "This isn't about creativity. This is about order, about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood." "Funny," I said. "Because it looks like the neighborhood's never been more curious." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm warning you. If you don't dismantle that thing, we will take further action. Fines, citations, legal avenues if necessary." That's when I smiled. Not big, just enough to let her know she was late to the party. "I wouldn't worry too much about fines, Karen. I've already spoken with the zoning office, showed them my permits. Turns out backyard art installations are perfectly legal, as long as they're not permanent dwellings." Her eyes narrowed. "You're playing games?" "No," I said. "You banned my gnomes. I'm just replacing them." With one, she went quiet for a moment. The porch felt still, like the air had stopped moving. She knew I wasn't bluffing, knew something was under that tarp, and now she realized it was almost finished. She opened her mouth like she had more to say, then thought better of it. She straightened her spine, forced a tight smile, and said, "You'll regret this." And then she turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV, tires screeching just a little as she pulled away. I stood there for a long time after, watching the dust settle on the street. She thought threats would work, but she'd given me the best gift of all, a deadline. Tomorrow morning, the tarp was coming down. I waited until just after sunrise. The sky was soft with that early golden haze, the kind that makes everything feel a little more dramatic. I figured if I was going to reveal a 10-foot statue of Karen dressed as a garden gnome, I might as well let the lighting do some of the work. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and pulled up a lawn chair. Then, one by one, I started untying the ropes that held the tarp in place. The fabric dropped slow, caught on the last corner, like it was savoring the moment. And then, there she was. 10 feet of concrete, Karen, gnome hat, pointed, slightly crooked, arms crossed over her chest like the real thing, head tilted ever so slightly in that permanent state of disapproval. A tiny clipboard rested under one arm with the words HOA approved etched into the surface. The face was the part I was proudest of, not exaggerated, not cartoonish, just accurate, sharp cheekbones, tight lips, that furrowed brow, the whole air of "you're doing life wrong" captured in stone. It took about 6 minutes for the first neighbor to show up. Greg peeked over the fence, did a double take, and actually dropped his coffee. 2 kids from up the street rode by on scooters and stopped dead in their tracks. One of them whispered, "Is that Mrs. Whitmore?" By the time it hit 8 a.m., the sidewalk was full, phones out, people laughing, pointing, shaking their heads. A few applauded. One woman brought her dog back for a second walk just to see it again. Nobody asked what it was. They knew. Karen must have seen the crowd from her window because the blinds on her front room twitched like she was trying to decide whether to call the police or crawl back into bed. I didn't look her way. I just sat in my lawn chair, sipping my coffee like it was any other Tuesday. The statue wasn't rude. It wasn't insulting. It was honest. And that made it all the more powerful. It held up a mirror to her version of order. Big, looming, and utterly ridiculous. Someone shouted from across the street, "Best gnome I've ever seen!" And that was it. The mood shifted. The fear Karen used to carry around like a purse started to break. The statue wasn't just a joke. It was a statement. A 10-foot "no thank you" carved in concrete. Karen didn't waste time. By noon, there were fresh violation notices taped to my mailbox, my door, and even my trash bin, which, for the record, was tucked exactly where it was supposed to be. She claimed the statue was intimidating, potentially defamatory, and a threat to neighborhood morale. That last one almost made me laugh. She called an emergency HOA meeting the next evening, sent out glossy flyers printed in color, probably at her own expense, inviting residents to discuss a serious breach of community standards. I went, of course. So did half the neighborhood. It wasn't like her usual meetings, where people sat bored in folding chairs while Karen rattled off flower bed dimensions and Christmas light regulations. This time, people were buzzing, whispering, smiling. Some even brought lawn chairs and popcorn, like it was a movie night. Karen stood at the front of the room with a projector and a laser pointer. She clicked to a slide with a photo of the statue, a close-up of the face, dramatic shadows and all. "This," she announced, "is a personal attack. It sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow this caricature to stand, what stops others from doing the same?" From the back of the room, someone called out, "You mean from expressing themselves?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's face twitched. She tried to argue it violated property harmony, that it was an eyesore, that it mocked the values of the neighborhood. But then Sarah from next door stood up and said, "Karen, it's not a mockery, it's art. And honestly, it looks just like you." More laughter, some applause. One by one, people started speaking, not just about the statue, about everything, the overreach, the nitpicking, the fear of putting a flower pot in the wrong place, the silent way Karen had ruled. The dam broke, and she wasn't ready for the flood. When the meeting finally ended, there was no vote to remove the statue. Instead, there was a petition to limit the board president's power. People gathered around the folding tables to sign it, with smiles, with relief, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room they didn't realize had gotten so dim. Karen stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots down the tile hallway. I didn't follow her. I just stood outside, under the street lamp, staring at the quiet silhouette of the statue in my yard. She'd tried to bury personality under rules. But now the whole neighborhood was remembering how to laugh. She didn't step foot outside for 3 days after the meeting, not once. The blinds stayed shut. Her little dog didn't do its usual patrol, and her SUV, usually parked with the precision of a runway model, remained hidden in the garage. The silence was nice. No new citations, no early morning photographs, no measuring tape peeking out from behind a bush like a suburban sniper. Just peace. But the real shift came slowly, in the yards. First it was Greg. He added a small gnome by his mailbox. Nothing flashy, just a little guy with a fishing pole and a smirk. Then the Jacobs family put out 2 more by their bird bath. A week later, Mrs. Halpern had an entire gnome tea party under her lilac tree, complete with tiny plates and painted cups. It was like the statue had broken a curse. Every time a new gnome appeared, someone would knock on my door or catch me in the driveway and say something like, "Figured if she didn't like yours, she'd really hate mine." And we'd both laugh, because it wasn't really about the gnomes anymore. It was about having permission to be ourselves. I kept mine right where it was, 10 feet tall, standing guard over a yard that no longer felt like a battlefield. I even planted some flowers at the base. Wild ones, the kind that grew how they wanted, not how they were told. Karen stayed on as HOA president for another 2 months, but the spell was broken. At the next election, she didn't even run. Someone else took her place. Someone quieter, less clipboard-obsessed. No one ever said exactly why Karen stepped back, but we all knew. Sometimes all it takes is a statue. The official rules never changed. The bylaws still had the same language about tasteful decorations and visual cohesion. But enforcement? That changed completely. The board stopped nitpicking. People started talking more, waving, swapping gardening tips. The fear faded. And every now and then, I'd catch Karen driving past my house, slowing just enough to glare at her stone doppelganger before speeding off again. She never said a word, never challenged it. I think deep down, even she knew the battle was over. The neighborhood had chosen. Not just me, not just the gnome, but freedom. And it all started with one letter, one statue, and one stubborn refusal to shrink. Sometimes the lawn needs more than mowing. Sometimes it needs justice.